This video can't get very far without spoiling most of the movie. If you're on the fence about seeing Underwater, or you'd written it off as a generic jump scare reel, know that it has hidden depths which may or may not come to light, and some very solid cinematography and performances, in addition to the generic jump scares. If you've already seen it, or need more convincing, let's dive in. There are a lot of steps involved in transmitting a theme from mind to pen to page to screen to mind. Sometimes the text will explicitly state or draw attention to one or more central themes, and from there it becomes much easier to evaluate whether or not those themes are supported by the work as a whole. In contrast, Underwater has powerful thematic underpinnings that never really get their time in the limelight. On one fin, it's a brisk change of pace to be able to drill into a generic jump scare reel and find gold. The movie makes you reflect on its events and put in a small amount of work to fully appreciate it. On the other fin, when the rest of the movie is a generic jump scare reel, trust in the author is reduced, and whether the themes are subtly woven throughout or merely a series of coincidences that happen to spell out a thematic statement is called into question. To be clear, the evidence for these themes is present in the movie. Whether or not they were planned is murkier. We can split our themes into three broad categories, in ascending order of importance and/or prominence. Number 1, protection, vulnerability, and empowerment. Number 2, time, choice, and cynicism and optimism. And number 3, light, darkness, and sight. By no means is Underwater a masterpiece of production, storytelling, or indeed thematic entanglement. Even in our three categories, there are contrivances, questions, and muddled motifs. But there is power here, a whole lot of it, with nowhere to go but up. Part 1. In Harm's Way. We'll begin with the shortest and easiest of our three broad thematic baskets. The six main characters spend the majority of the movie's runtime in exoskeletal power suits designed for EVA tasks in high-pressure environments. They can take quite a few hits, but any kind of structural failure means catastrophic consequences, largely due to the immense pressure they're under. Each of the three characters that dies during the seafloor trek falls victim to those consequences. A small crack in Rodrigo's helmet is enough to cause him to implode when the group is forced to exit the Kepler via a damaged airlock. One of the monsters pulls off Paul's boot and rips him out of his suit, crushing him. And finally, another monster drags Captain Lucien upward too quickly to adapt to the pressure differentials, causing his suit to implode, or possibly detonate, in what appears to be a spherical blue explosion. At multiple points, the monsters are unable to break through the suits themselves. Nora is slammed into the seafloor repeatedly and devoured whole, and she emerges unharmed. Paul only dies because his distance line is caught on a rock and the monster is able to exert leverage on his boot. Even their limited oxygen doesn't cause lasting harm. Smith is put out of commission by a damaged oxygen scrubber. The monsters are at one point alerted to their presence by Emily's low oxygen alarm, and Nora almost suffocates when she can't get her helmet off, but all three survive. No characters ever drown. The message is clear. The worst danger is the thousands of pounds of pressure, and the deep one-looking monsters are merely a delivery vector. As long as their suits are on and intact, our heroes are safe. As established when they're leaving the Kepler, the characters' bulky jackets and cargo pants won't fit inside the tight suits, and most of the characters are actually in nothing but t-shirts and underwear the whole time. The movie even lampoons ogling viewers with a shot of ripped briefs as one of the characters bends over to remove their pants, only to reveal it's Paul and not Nora or Emily as one might expect. There are no shots of Nora that linger longingly as she saunters down the hall, nor do Lucien or Smith ever rip off their shirt to perform some Herculean feat of strength. However, after reaching the Roebuck at the end of their trek, the characters remove their suits for good. To drive home that they're now useless, Emily has to crack Nora's helmet open to save her from the aforementioned suffocation. The final 10 minutes or so of the movie have Nora, Emily, and Smith limping around the Roebuck in their underwear as they're looking for the escape pods, and it's pretty unsexy. They look desperate, pathetic, and most importantly, human. Until now, their only defenses against the deep ones have been their suits. As they stumble toward salvation, they are completely and utterly vulnerable. And yet, it is only when they shed their protective armor that they are able to claim what counts for victory. Here, at their most exposed, they're able to reach the escape pods and get to safety. At least, Smith and Emily are. The third pod is non-functional. Nora herself managed to kill a deep one minutes earlier, only for her suit to attempt to suffocate her after the alpha Cthulhuoid monster destroys the bridge. Her one piece of protection becomes yet another threat. Now, as the Alpha prepares to destroy the Roebuck and its horde of deep ones chases the rising pods, Nora overloads the drill's core. With nothing left to shield her, where she should be in the most danger, she finally achieves some measure of power over the monsters they have been running from. Part 2. The Lonely Shore. Nora's opening narration is about her father's outlook on life, which she has inherited. Being a cynic means you have less to lose. We see this philosophy in action immediately as Kepler Station suffers a pressure breach and begins to collapse. At Rodrigo's urging, Nora shuts a door on 2 other workers running to the bulkhead in order to save herself, Rodrigo, and, as Rodrigo tries to reassure her later, the rest of the rig. She's reluctant in the moment, but not all that affected. It's clear she is able to quickly rationalize her decision. If she hadn't closed the door, all 4 of them would have drowned or been crushed, as would everyone else on the station. Soon after, she scolds the captain for his going down with the ship mentality since he has a daughter, and similarly chastises Smith and Emily when they momentarily fall into despair and ask to be left behind. As the 6 main characters journey from the Kepler to Midway to the Roebuck, Nora is usually first to head into danger. She tries to live only in the moment and not think about the future. It's the captain who encourages the group to keep going despite the seeming hopelessness of their situation, and Nora eventually learns to follow his example. A crucial exchange that illustrates Nora's personal journey and her internal struggle of cynicism versus optimism takes place during the scene where Captain Lucien describes his plan to don pressure suits and walk 2 miles across the ocean floor to Roebuck Station. Anxious, Nora tells him to admit they all might die if they try it. In return, Lucien asks her to admit they might live. After Lucien sacrifices himself to save her, and she discovers at Shepherd Station that his daughter had in fact died some years ago, Nora is metaphorically reborn, emphasized by her curling up in the fetal position under a shower, and takes on the captain's mantle, including literally donning his old pressure suit in order to save the lives of her remaining crew members. A small clue to this transformation also occurs during the opening monologue. Nora notices a spider in the sink unable to climb up. She moves to turn on the faucet and kill it, but something stops her, and she instead helps it get out with a paper towel. Of course, the entire wing of the base is destroyed seconds later, but her moment of compassion shows that even before the chaos begins, there is at least one crack in her bulkhead of cynicism. The other important part of Nora's narration is how her father didn't believe in time, only moments. Time is a significant danger throughout the movie. If our 6-person band waits too long in any one safe place, the pressure damage or the monsters themselves will eventually destroy it. If they take too long moving between locations, they'll run out of oxygen. There are 3 moments where time stops being entirely linear, not counting cuts between scenes. The initial pressure breach, when there's a brief slow-motion shot of Nora's reactive flinch. After her arrival at the Shepherd, when there's a montage of Nora panicking about her lack of supplies before suiting up again and resolving to soldier on. And the final shot of Nora, which we will get to momentarily. All 3 of these elements come together in the final sequence. There are only 2 functional escape pods at Roebuck Station, and Nora is barely even phased, as if she expected this outcome. She forces Smith and Emily to take the working pods despite Emily's protests. Trying to convince her, Nora says she would give anything for one more moment with her deceased fiancé, and that Emily still has a life to live. Again, she closes a door on her crew, but this time, it's to save her crew and not herself. She is at last looking to the future, just not her future. After overloading the core, Nora stares up at the Alpha, which of course doesn't acknowledge her, and says it has 60 seconds. In this scene, the Alpha is to Nora as Nora was to the Spider, an unknowable intelligence much greater and older and more complicated than she is, with designs and agency she will never understand, only the Alpha fully intends to let her drown. Then we finally get the expected closing narration that will ironically echo the intro, except it doesn't. Instead, Nora's final monologue describes how time can slow down in the dark, how a moment can become an infinity, and quips, "So let's light it up." The explosion reaches Nora in slow motion as she opens her eyes, facing down the impending vaporization of the monsters, the drill, and herself. We get this shot after a shot of the explosion destroying the base and the Alpha, as if time is moving at different speeds. That this is also the final shot of the movie before it cuts to the credits implies a further timeless quality to it. For Nora, this instant, this moment where she is finally able to take her life into her own hands and strike back against the Alpha, will last eternally, or at least for as long as she can hold on to it. Part 3. They Who Know the Storm. The clearest and most obviously intentional motif in the movie is light. It starts right at the beginning. The flickering lights are Nora's first sign of the impending pressure breach. Then, while they discuss their next move, Captain Lucien tells Nora to follow the light as he shines a flashlight in her eyes, checking for responsiveness. Immediately afterward, we're introduced to Emily, one of the eventual 2 survivors, who is wearing a t-shirt with a rainbow that says, "Shine Bright." In the cargo lift, the group discovers that the monsters are drawn toward light. Paul repeatedly notes how low visibility is, and yet the first sighting of one of the monsters is very slow and clear. It doesn't emerge from the darkness, but only when they shine a light on it. Smith kills the monster with a bolt gun, and we cut back into the cargo lift with a fade to white transition that makes it look like Smith killed it with a flash of light. After the tower is destroyed in a bright yellow explosion, the group lands on the seafloor and Paul moves ahead, telling the others to follow the green light to reach the flooded underground tunnel where the monster only has to do what they do, follow the light, to catch and kill Paul. At Midway Station, the group gets a moment of respite in a well-lit room. It's still not safe here, the glass is cracking and the building will soon collapse, but they can take a breather and plan their next move. On the next leg of their journey, the group is attacked again and a deep one drags Smith away. They turn off their lights finally, and Lucien and Nora manage to rescue Smith. Unfortunately, Lucien then tries to go for Smith's gun, giving the monster the opportunity it needs to haul him away, and Nora hangs on tight to his distance line. During this action sequence, we get our first half-second look at a deep one, as a series of oscillating lights illuminate it as it slowly slinks around toward Nora while she tries to help Lucien up. Again, it grabs Lucien and takes off, and Nora refuses to let go, even as both her and Lucien's suits begin to crack. Instead, Lucien cuts the line from his end and dies in what appears to be a radiant blue spherical explosion. Nora crashes to the ground and stumbles upon Shepherd Station. She goes through her dark night of the soul, is reborn in the water, learns the truth about Lucien's daughter, puts on the new suit, grabs a flare gun with 2 rounds, and sets out to save her remaining friends. She regroups with Emily, who is dragging an alive but still unconscious Smith across the seafloor, and tells her about her own fiancé, who was lost on a routine outing and never found. Emily notices a glow up ahead, and they finally see the Roebuck as they crest a hill. All the lights are on, the station hasn't already been destroyed, just a little farther and they're safe. Except, not quite. Something very large is hovering over the gateway to the Roebuck's airlock door, a door marked by a green light. Hanging from this very large hovering thing are dozens, maybe hundreds of the deep ones, apparently sleeping. Emily's low oxygen alarm alerts them, and Nora tells her to run for the door while she distracts them. One of the monsters nearly devours Nora whole, suit and all, but she manages to kill it and crawl free, Tauntaun style, with one shot from her flare gun. As she prepares to face down the rest, the very large hovering thing moves, and she fires her other shot to get a better look at the skyscraper-sized kaiju Cthulhu that has made its home around the Roebuck. The Alpha destroys the bridge, sending Nora flying in a yellow explosion, and Emily rushes back out into danger to pull her inside. Finally, they reach the escape pods, also marked by green lights. Nora convinces Emily to take the last pod, overloads the drill's core, and destroys the monsters, again in a spherical explosion of radiant blue light. Her closing narration says how one can get lost in the dark, so let's light it up. We also need to briefly go over sight and how the movie uses it as a motif, much less than the others presented here. It starts with Nora, Rodrigo, and Paul encountering the body of a fellow crew member and meeting her still open eyes. Then Lucien shines the flashlight in Nora's eyes, which serves as a visual transition to the next scene. It continues when they first discover that light attracts the monsters, their need to see clashing with their need to remain unseen. Later, when Lucien is chasing after Smith, he transmits his helmet's camera feed to Nora and says he's turning on his eye. Shortly after, of course, he dies and passes the torch to her. And at the end, we close on the slow-motion shot of Nora opening her eyes to face the monster and the explosion. This acts as something of a bridge between the themes of light and dark. Now, what does this all mean? Part 4. Silent Seas. One thing we haven't touched on is how almost every character in the movie suffers from severe survivor's guilt. Nora has her fiancé, and Lucien has his daughter. Rodrigo wears the broken helmet he finds, rather than giving it to someone else and getting them killed. Smith fears he is a burden on the others and asks to be left behind at Midway Station. Emily is the most viscerally startled by the others' deaths and, up until reuniting with Nora, is always a hair away from breaking down and refusing to continue. Only Paul seems to be handling himself well, hiding his obvious fear with sarcastic quips, but he has an important line when he gives his stuffed white rabbit to Emily. "If anything happens to him, I'll haunt you." In the moment, it's an amusing reversal of a line you might expect. Later, it becomes a sorrowful prediction of the psychological weight he and the others have for the 3 survivors. Many of them also have a fixation on retrieving mementos to give to the loved ones of the deceased, including a wallet from the man who died outside the cargo lift and Paul's rabbit. More broadly, the characters must constantly grapple with grief and despair. Despair for the base, their friends, their future, their chances of survival, and once or twice, despair for humanity as a whole and nature's seeming desire to take revenge. Lucien and Nora, in turn, are the group's guiding light, steering them away from despair, not necessarily toward hope or salvation, just anything but despair. Like fear, despair is the mind killer. In this case, wallowing in it will get you literally killed by a bunch of Lovecraftian monsters. Remember Nora's closing narration about darkness. Darkness isn't an explicit theme in the movie until that point, but it is omnipresent. The monsters live in utter darkness at the bottom of the ocean, or at least they did until us humans set up shop and turned on the lights. During their journey, the group is safest in darkness where the monsters can't see, and neither can they. They can't stay in the darkness either, or they'll run out of oxygen, or succumb to the pressure. Darkness is both danger and defense, just like light. The survivors are only able to continue by following light, but light will also draw the monsters to them. In some cases, it's the light itself that's dangerous, like how Lucien ends up dying because he chose to go back for Smith's gun, which was established as a source of light, if only a cinematic or metaphorical one. Lucien is, of course, the group's anchor point for the light theme. Just look at his name. When Nora won't let go of his line, she is literally holding on to her last light, even though holding on will kill her. Similarly, it's the metaphorical and physical light of the overloaded drill exploding that destroys the monsters and Nora. As with her protective suit, as with her cynicism and the infinity of the final shot, the ending sequence is a culmination of all of her pain, all the monsters and shadows that have tormented her for the entire runtime and beyond, where she is finally able to turn it all on the Cthulhuoid Alpha and its spawn. Only by removing her armor can she fight back. Only by looking to the future can she let go of the past. Only by stepping into the light, a light that she knows will kill her, is she able to strike against the darkness. From this, we can distill the core of Underwater's message, odd as it may seem in a January B-horror movie that totally flopped on its opening weekend. Sometimes it's safer in the darkness, and sometimes it's safer in the light, but you can't stay in either forever. You have to strive toward the light, even if it might burn you, but you can't keep the light on all the time, or you'll be incinerated. You can pretend the darkness doesn't exist, you can try to ignore despair, and die, blinded by the glow, or you can pretend there is nothing but darkness, you can wallow in despair, and die blind like a deep-sea creature. Neither one will let you climb out of your pit, conquer your grief, and move on. To survive is to find balance. To find peace is to open your eyes and see. Part 5. The Inconstant Billows. To close this out, let's briefly talk about a few ideas the movie tosses up that it doesn't really follow through on. Number 1, Alice in Wonderland. Paul has some kind of obsession with Alice in Wonderland. He has a stuffed animal, a literal white rabbit that he deeply cares about. You might think it's going for some kind of follow the white rabbit thing, but Paul dies early on, and it's never really connected to the more explicit follow the light theme, although it's notable that Nora does bring the rabbit the whole way, eventually handing it to Smith in his escape pod to give to Paul's family. As they're suiting up for the first time, Paul quotes, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there," relevant to Nora's struggle with optimism in the future and the group's journey across the sea floor. He also mentions at one point how Alice cried so hard she almost drowned in her own tears, which dovetails with our theme about despair and not getting lost in it. Lastly, at some point, Paul wrote, "We're all mad here," on his oxygen tank. This one's kind of a wash. Number 2, Captain Lucien's secrets. While Lucien is explaining his plan to march to the Roebuck, another character asks about going to Shepherd Station instead, and its location is pointed out on their map. Lucien brushes it off, saying that the Shepherd is gone. It's unclear how he knows this, and it isn't brought up again. Even when Nora finds it by accident and uncovers Lucien's old suit, she doesn't wonder why he hid it or tell Emily and Smith. Also in Lucien's locker, Nora discovers a map with red conspiracy board threads indicating the proposed Roebuck station. This feels like it's setting up for some reveal that Lucien, or perhaps Tian Industries, knew about the monsters, closed down the Shepherd because of them, and or built the Roebuck in spite of them, but it's never addressed. Maybe it's setting up for a sequel. Number 3. Nature and environmentalism. The movie basically only pays lip service to explaining why the monsters are attacking. While at Midway Station, Emily dramatically theorizes that humans, specifically the drilling company, took too much from the ocean, and the ocean is merely taking back. It never gets brought up again, and we never do get a concrete reason, which makes this line seem like a red herring to appease curious viewers in preparation for Number 4. Lovecraft and the Unknown. The movie is obviously influenced by the Cthulhu mythos. The Alpha itself is a building-sized humanoid creature with a tentacled face and additional appendages on its back, and the smaller monsters that plague the group are very intentionally human-like, but not quite human. We don't get a good look at any of them. Even at the end, we only see glimpses and flashes of their entire forms, and only in the dimly lit exterior of the Roebuck. There's also no way to win against them except through self-sacrifice, and even that is not necessarily guaranteed to be a permanent victory. In the end, news clippings reveal that Tian Industries will be resuming drilling at the site as soon as repairs to the structure are finished, and that Emily and Smith's testimonies are being suppressed, showing that they haven't learned their lesson about messing with whatever's down there. So that's what Underwater has to say about despair and moving on. It's a weird place to find a message like this, but it was particularly inspirational to me, because it's more complex than the more commonplace grief is temporary, or move toward the light, and it has resonated ever since I walked out of the theater. It is not otherwise an exceptional movie. The dialogue is mostly mediocre, and sometimes bad. The characters are not very complex, but the performances are good, especially Kristen Stewart's, who manages to capture Nora's vulnerability, anxiety, fear, and bravery all at the same time. The horror starts off compellingly atmospheric, but eventually devolves into shaky cam and jump scares, although that initial fear of the unknown and the deep sea never goes away. The reveal of the alpha in the light of Nora's flare gun is legitimately unsettling. Underwater made $7 million during its opening weekend against a budget of $50 million. That's a shame. As generic and uninspired as some parts of it are, it has enough good ideas that I don't think it deserved to flop. At least, it didn't deserve to flop that hard. It's a tight 90 minutes that maintains tone and tension for its entire runtime. I'd take another Underwater over the umpteenth Paranormal Activity knockoff any day. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, please appease the almighty algorithm by engaging with the video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you're of a mind, consider buying me a coffee or supporting me on Patreon. I'll see you next time.